It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Naomi. The UK is a service-led economy, and one key sector and jewel in our crown has been our world-renowned universities. International students flock to the UK for a slice of that glory. Domestic students rack up huge debt to be able to attend, but the sector is in deep trouble, and that should worry us all because of its critical role in our soft power globally and to Treasury coffers at home. According to Universities UK, the higher education and research sector makes a total net contribution of £265 billion to the economy. For every £1 of public money invested in universities, 14 is returned into the economy. Postgraduate students make significant contributions through higher tax and national insurance, with benefits to the Treasury of £68,000 per postgraduate taught student and £121,000 per postgraduate research student. And of course, there's a ripple effect. In addition to the large impact within the public sector, the activities of HE providers are estimated to generate particularly large impact, with sectors like the restaurant sector, the production sector, real estate sector, and the professional and support activities sector, totaling many, many billions. Yet universities are struggling. According to the Office for Students, 40% of UK universities were running a deficit in 2023-24, and they forecast as many as 72% of universities could be in deficit within the next year. Nick Hillman, who is director of the Higher Education Policy Institute, said, "We will struggle to claim the UK still has a world-class higher education system if over 100 institutions have less than 30 days liquidity. Next year's spending review could be make or break for some of them." Now, of course, austerity, Brexit, and the pandemic have all contributed to the pain. But perhaps one unintended consequence of the marketisation of this sector over the past 2 decades has been moving teaching staff onto insecure contracts. It's bad for them and for students. I wanted to get under the bonnet of the issue with somebody who has forgotten more about the subject than I ever hoped to know. So I was delighted to speak to award-winning writer and academic Alice Jolly, who brought a successful claim against Oxford University for employment rights. We talked through it all. And interestingly, we really touched on the soft power that universities bring beyond just the financial contribution that they make. There is an enormous cultural benefit and human benefit to making sure that our universities are properly funded and properly remunerating their staff. I hope you enjoy the show as much as I did.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Welcome, Alice.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start, if I may, with the gig economy in the round. Later, we'll talk more broadly about the state of the UK higher education sector. But I suspect many people listening to this show, when they hear the words gig worker, casual contract employment, might immediately think of an Uber driver, somebody who works for Deliveroo, not Oxford University. So my first question to you really is, how pervasive is the use of this kind of contract and gig working across the economy?
I think it's probably hard to know exactly, but certainly in higher education, since marketisation in 2012, there have been large amounts of people on casual contracts. Oxford University has one of the worst records, and that's about 70%. But across other universities, it will be high. And I think in other professional spheres also, casual contracts have just become more and more the norm.
Tell us about your own experience. You're a lecturer at Oxford, and yet you were not treated like you were a full-time employee on a permanent contract with all of the employment rights that come with that. So you and a colleague successfully won a claim in court for employment status. What was the basis of your claim? How did that case pan out?
What happened is I and my colleague, we'd both worked for the university for 16 years on a part-time basis. And we complained about our pay, which was sometimes as low as £23 an hour. And we had no employment rights, no status. We had no business card, no computer given to us by the university. We were sort of external contractors, but then when we were presented to the students, we were presented as though we were the staff of the university, and our names were also used on the website to market the course, to encourage students to think, oh, I'm going to be taught by this person who's part of the university. But that actually wasn't the case. And the thing is, we didn't really give quite enough thought to it until we complained about pay, and then we were sacked just like that, without even a word, really. And we just suddenly felt, wait a minute, this really isn't okay. But we didn't really feel that so much for ourselves because, to be honest, we're both middle-aged women and we could survive without those salaries. We could do other things. But we'd spoken to so many young academics for whom the situation is simply disastrous. There just is no career for them. They're just going from one short-term contract to another. We met women who are not going to have children because they simply can't afford to, people who are never going to get a mortgage because they haven't got a proper job. So it was really on behalf of those people that we took the case.
Am I right in saying that you weren't therefore entitled to pension through the university system, or did they make some kind of provision for that?
Well, this is where it was all really strange, because we kind of refer to ourselves as sort of Schrodinger's employees, in that you're sort of there when they want you there and you're not there when they don't want you there. And so things like, we were paying PAYE and we would have access to the university pension, but we didn't have employment rights. So we were in this kind of halfway house. But what my colleague and I said, and this is the key to the thing, I think, is that we needed to either be proper freelancers or we needed to have proper contracts of employment. And the thing is, if you're a freelancer, you should really be being paid a pretty high hourly rate, because that rate is compensating you for the rights you don't have. Like so many people, we found ourselves in this kind of no man's land where we didn't have the relatively high pay that a freelancer might get, and neither did we have the security that we would have had if we were proper employees.
And the judge found in your favour?
He did, yes. There was a 3-day hearing and it was very, very hard going. I mean, obviously, Oxford University hired very expensive lawyers and they were very worried by the case, and universities altogether are very concerned by what has happened, because they now effectively have to change their whole way of employing people. And there are potentially huge costs, and there are also potentially huge amounts of back pay because people have been employed illegally for a long time. So not surprisingly, there've been big efforts to shut all this down, really.
Now, you and your colleague, from what you said, effectively have acted as whistleblowers. You've shone a spotlight on this practice within the university sector. And quite rightly, you say you were doing this not just for yourselves, but on behalf of those with fewer means to take on such an enormous, ancient, prestigious, well-funded institution as Oxford University. I suppose my question is, what really will change of any of it? Because it feels like we might be in an era of almost zero accountability, that even when we do successfully hold an institution to account and establish a need for change, whether that is the scandal around the Grenfell residence, the post office, child abuse in the Church of England, nothing ever seems to meaningfully change. Am I wrong? Please tell me I am. Things can and will get better.
I think it's very hard to know. I mean, certainly for us, we have been so far disappointed in the outcome. You know, we hoped that loads of people would very quickly go to their employers and say, wait a minute, I should have a proper contract, please give it to me. But of course, it didn't really happen because those people are frightened that they will be sacked. And although legally they can now perhaps get their employment rights, it's going to be really hard to do that. And so progress is slow. And also, unfortunately, obviously, there's such a huge collapse across the HE sector at the moment. There are redundancies in just about every university that people are just clinging on. And you are absolutely right to talk as well about the post office, Grenfell Towers, the Church of England. It seems to be right across our society. And it's this weird thing that everybody can see that something very wrong has happened, court cases are won. And then I think we all wait to hear that sort of heads have rolled and that things are now all going to be different. And it isn't really happening. It's hard to know, I would say, because it may be that in 2 or 3 years, things will look very different. I mean, my colleague and I have been heartened actually just over the last few days to hear of a couple of new legal cases, quite major legal cases, and they are citing our case. So it probably is happening, but just really, really slowly, and far more slowly than it needs to for the people who are losing out at the moment.
And surely the unions are all over this. I mean, it feels like exactly the kind of thing that they ought to be picking up and running with. But maybe is it just a lower priority for them because they've got so many workers to represent who are on full-time permanent contracts for whom their employment rights are much more clear-cut? What could they be doing more?
I would say that we've had some fantastic support from individuals within UCU, the University and College Lecturers Union, and the Society of Authors. But overall, I think the problem is that for a long time, the unions were very weak and it's taking them time to get back up to speed. And I think certainly UCU for a long time probably saw its role, as you say, mainly to defend people who had employment contracts. And they are now, I think, hopefully awake to this. But I think also what they need to be doing is using the law, because there's a lot of strikes, and huge respect to those people who are striking because it's terribly difficult and hard. But I wonder sometimes if the law is a better route. Certainly, there's a big job in rebuilding union capacity, and also I think introducing a whole new generation of young people to the concept of a union, which they may not necessarily know about. But again, there is hope because I see a lot of young people now getting involved in unions. And I think that there is a huge revival there.
Well, I hope so. And on Quiet Riot, we often do a call to action for our listeners. And more than once it has been join a union, get involved and make your voice heard that way. So you talked about the unions basically following by your example and using the law more than, say, striking, which has its place, but may not move the dial as quickly. The Labour government has got an employment rights bill going through the Commons at the moment. It's at committee stage, and it has 28, I think, individual employment reforms contained within it, but that includes ending exploitative 0 hours contracts. Do you welcome this? Will it make a difference for people who are in your situation? And a follow-up question, I suppose, is we do hear some defense of 0 hours contracts. Some workers like them, students, for instance, who actually, want to be able to do a little bit here and there. Casual employment can work quite well for them. Or is it just by definition that if you're a casual worker, you are open to exploitation and we should just end it completely for everybody?
Again, it all comes down to money. As for my colleague and I mean, I personally don't think that all casual employment should be ended. I mean, actually, to be honest, part of the reason why my colleague and I were doing that work is possibly because we're both married women with children, and it had a certain flexibility. But it is a question of the very low pay being offered. I think that there's a place for it, but there needs to be legislation in place to make sure it's not just an excuse for exploitation.
Let's get back to the higher education sector more broadly, because you've touched on money. And in the introduction to the show, I was explaining to listeners the parlor state that the sector finds itself in. What, in your view, is driving university management towards casual contracts and away from the traditional tenured positions academia was once so prized for?
I think I've actually only myself recently come to understand this. I mean, for me, the whole experience has been very difficult because I actually loved Oxford University. I actually loved Oxford University. I studied there and I sort of believed in the university and the dream of that world. And so I think that even though I was working in universities, I didn't really notice that the universities have sort of been occupied in some sense by managers with a very neoliberal approach. And so their approach is simply, as you would expect, that we're going to pay these people as little as we can and get absolutely the maximum out of them. And that's what's driving them. But I think, when I think about it, I think the people I've had such a struggle with are not the real Oxford University. I think the real Oxford University is a place where there's a huge love of learning. But it is almost as though it's been sort of occupied by managers and admin people, and that's the people we've been fighting. And they're usually not people who are doing any teaching, often not academics, and just looking at the money and not realizing that in the process of doing that, they're killing what the university is actually about.
To what extent do you think that is people rooted in neoliberal philosophy and ideology versus the operational struggle of universities being underfunded?
I think it's hard to comment on the funding situation because it's very complicated. And I do accept that universities have got real financial difficulties, and probably what happened in 2012 was quite disastrous for them. But I would also say that there's clear evidence of really, really poor management and huge amounts of money being wasted, particularly on property-related projects and things of this kind. And so, I think there is this class of people within universities with very big ambitions, but teaching is not at the heart of what they're trying to do. In fact, teaching and research have become secondary, and the universities have become accommodation providers and property developers. And this is all about money and not really to do with what the university is meant to be doing.
Which is incredibly sad, not just for the academic body of staff, but the students too. And it feels to me that students are now customers rather than pupils. They're paying tens of thousands of pounds in fees, racking up huge debt from student loans. They can get crippled by interest repayments and, may not even get gainful employment at the end of their study, such as the difficult situation of the economy at the moment. Why would proper employment contracts for lecturers benefit students as well as the lecturers themselves?
The students' learning environment and the tutors' teaching environment are the same. So basically, if you haven't got people who are teaching in a good environment with good support, then the students are not going to get a good experience. Those things are intricately linked. And it's very interesting because when I talk to students about this, they really understand that. And I think possibly they understand it more and more. Perhaps 10 years ago, they might not have seen that. Whereas now they're very aware that if they don't get good value for money, and I think they're not getting good value for money, then that may be because the people teaching them are not being properly paid and don't have proper security of employment. So those things are sort of intricately tied up together, I would say.
And so in conclusion, Alice, if you were running the country and you had a remit for the university sector, what would you be doing to shore up this critical industry? I mean, the university sector's contribution to the economy is incredibly good, and we need to be protecting it. And it's a vital export industry. International students in particular, funding a huge amount of the university budget at the moment. What can be done? What would the solution look like, or solutions look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you raise this point of the value of the university. And the fight that my colleague and I've had have been long and difficult. But when it is very difficult, I remind myself that we are fighting for the future of higher education in our country. And yes, that's important for jobs and for opportunities and the economy and all of that. But actually, it's important beyond that as well. I mean, it is the basis of our civilization. It's how we move forward, new knowledge, new learning, new skills. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who ever really goes on any kind of educational course and regrets it, because you always get something out of education. So it is so, so key. And I myself honestly couldn't untangle the whole issue of university finance, but I do feel that what we've got to do is put teaching and research back at the centre of the whole thing. And I think face-to-face teaching is incredibly important, because universities and teaching altogether are about human relationships. And that's also something my colleague and I were fighting for, because in court, the suggestion was very much, well, you just turn up and you deliver some lectures and you go. But of course, it isn't that. You know, I was teaching on a master's degree. When people sign up for a master's degree, they're signing up for ongoing relationships. And it's out of those ongoing relationships that they get new skills, new confidence, new ideas. And so this really isn't a minor matter. And it shouldn't always just be assessed in terms of economy and money. We should also acknowledge that it's a key part of the fabric of our society.
Alice, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Quiet Riot. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that mini interview with Alice. I'd certainly have loved her lectures when I was studying. I think what I took from it was a sadness at how pervasive an issue insecure contracts are within universities. And perhaps the part that made me most angry is the realization that Oxford sells courses off the back of the reputations, the credibility, the publishing record, the experience of people like Alice, but without giving them full employment rights and a fair wage. So if you're a union member, write to them about the issue. Tell them what Alice said, that they could be using the law much more effectively to get justice for workers that will in turn benefit students and the UK as a whole. But for now, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye. Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alexandreo and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Singita. Artwork by Simona Canellu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.